So we're gonna start the presentation now, and we're going to hear from Dr. Lisa Johnson. And then we're going to start the second presentation, which is on our SARE grant. And in the middle of that, at some point, there'll be a break. So this is a double session. It'll span until the lunch time. So I want to welcome at this point, Dr. Lisa Johnson. Lisa started the effort to measure on-farm food loss in the United States and serves as an independent consultant and as the National SARE Food Loss and Waste Program Manager. Her projects focus on in-field measurement, estimation, and analysis of food loss in fruit and vegetable crops. She provides collaborators with technical assistance and protocols for measuring and reducing food loss. Dr. Johnson will discuss sampling techniques for estimating losses on partner farms. The techniques learned will be used to estimate national fruit and vegetable losses, leveraging gleaners like us who are in the field just at the right time to collect data. So Lisa is our program support and program manager for our AGO grant. So welcome, Lisa. Good morning. Good to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning. My name is Lisa. And good morning to our friends, new and old, over Zoom. I'm really excited to be here today, and thanks to Sean and Kathy for the invitation to speak. My first AGO conference was last year when I announced our SARE grant funding opportunity, and I'm really grateful to a lot of y'all for applying for that funding. We had 103 applications for the food loss and waste grants, which got narrowed down to 14 projects that have been awarded around the country. So the AGO project is one of those. We have another awardee here and maybe some over Zoom. So I'm excited to be with y'all today. Next slide, please. So what really grabbed me when I started reading Jonathan Bloom's book back in 2010 is that all the things I was reading about food loss on farms, I thought couldn't be true, right? There were red flags for me as a horticulturist. So I started digging further into it and contacting people around the country to find out how much food was lost on farms. In other words, that was never harvested, right? Perfectly fresh, healthy, edible food at the correct maturity that's just not harvested. So I really wanted to know the answer to this question: how much food is lost on farms? And I dug into it for several years, creating protocols on how to measure what's left behind, and have since worked with a lot of different groups around the world to help them with their measurement efforts. Go ahead. So this is a picture of what's lost globally. And as you can see, fruit and vegetables and roots and tubers are lost at the highest rates. So those of y'all that work with fruit and vegetables and roots and tubers, you're in the right place to be reducing food loss. Not that we shouldn't pay attention to meat, seafood, dairy, and grains, but there are significantly lower losses in those. Go ahead with the next slide. So for those of you that like to get really nerdy with food loss and waste, like I do, there are lots and lots of definitions of food loss and food waste. And your definition is just as good as my definition, is just as good as the USDA or FAO definition. But what's easiest for most of us working in food loss and waste is kind of this approach that splits the supply chain in losses at the beginning of the supply chain and waste further on. So typically a common definition is food loss happens when food leaves the human food supply chain on the farm following harvest or in the processing or distribution sector. So I'm going to use the term food loss because that's where I work with farms. You can call it food waste, but I've found it's a really easy way to shut down a conversation with a farmer very, very quickly. Please go ahead. So just to remind you all, if you're working on food loss or food waste, you are working towards a global goal, right? The Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 aims to cut in half food loss and food waste. If you're not familiar with these, you should be. You're doing great and important work, right? These are a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure all people enjoy peace and prosperity, right? That's why we get up in the morning, okay? You can go ahead. In the US, we signed on to advance towards this global goal way back in 2015. And the funny part is we just got a national strategy to reduce food loss and waste last year. So that's how quickly our federal government works. But now, there are a bunch of people signed on to this and ready to go. Again, our goal is called Target 12.3 to cut in half global food loss and waste. Go ahead. So when we measure food loss on farms, it gives us more of a sense of how much is lost. And we all know that pounds are not the most important, maybe, measurement. But in my world, in working in federal funding and even in foundation grants and things, sometimes data is important to tell your story. So here we have a picture of a crop lost because of what? Weather, right? Okay, that's clear to see. But how much was lost? If we want to tell that story, we need not only the why, but we need the numbers. You can go to the next slide. So a quick reminder here that selling fresh produce or for processing is dependent on market forces. So it's very important when we're working with growers to ensure that we're not blaming them for food loss or food waste on their farm. It's very important to, in your language, when you're talking with them, to try and avoid blaming them, right? Okay, the easiest way I have found to do this is to take the word you out of it, just like you're supposed to do on emails now. And say, maybe what triggered the end of the harvest in this field? Instead of, why did you leave this unharvested, right? Because that really implies a lot of blame. So we want to make sure that we understand as gleaners, as, I'm sort of a research type, that we understand that this was not a choice they made. It was the only option they had, given the market situation that day. These things change day to day for farmers. And so the only way they're able to respond when a crop is in the field is to harvest or not harvest. Those are their only options. So if conditions are bad, they don't harvest. Go ahead. Okay, wow. So there's some animations here. Go 4 times, I think. Oh, there you go. Okay, so when we have an estimate of crops that are lost in the field, it's going to tell us something as gleaners, and it's going to tell farmers something different. So it's important to understand that the reasons you're interested in a lost crop might be different than the reasons a farmer is interested. I've seen this many times, measured in a field, given the farmer that data, and they immediately have ideas on what they would do to change that in the future. But for us, or for farmers, see, what they want to know is their size, the size of their opportunity to further market that crop. They want to know whether making the decision to stop harvesting at the correct time and how well their labor is doing in response to training, and how much more of the field they would need to harvest to fill up a truck, right? So these are sort of the tangible, practical things that they might want to know. Go ahead. Maybe one's there, that's good. So nonprofits, as many of y'all are in the room, might understand from an estimate of what's left in the field, how much capacity you need to go after that produce, right? How many trucks, how many people, how much time would you need to be able to recover that food? Go ahead a little further. That's good. So in government, at our state or national level, it's important for them to understand how much surplus food is out there. Because without that information, nobody has a real clear picture of what our food supply looks like. If we don't have a clear idea of what the food supply looks like, we just say, hey, plant more food, right? Grow more, get higher yields, do better, right? If we know that all of that surplus is out there, we start to understand that we don't need to plant more, we need to use more, right? Be more efficient, in other words. And so if we know what's out there in the field and if we're in government, we could also try to understand if there's a policy that needs to be changed that could reduce the amount of food that's lost. So if you're a nonprofit, for example, and you understand how much surplus is out there, you could go to your policymakers and say, hey, we really need some support in capturing this. Maybe we should bring some processing facilities into our state, for example. Maybe, you know, we could put a line in our state budget to support the food bank purchasing from growers. So there's all kinds of ways we can use this information. In addition, we will never know if we're cutting food loss and waste in half if we don't have some kind of baseline measurement, right? So we need those numbers to begin with. And then I think two more. Yes, and fresh produce buyers are also interested in this because they would know then what crops to emphasize in a responsible or sustainable sourcing program. Those are not super popular yet, but let's hope they become more popular. And, you know, they might be able to estimate how much to pay a grower for a whole field in the case of a whole crop contracting situation, which also doesn't happen too much, but let's hope it happens more in the future. Go ahead. Okay, so this is a picture of losses in 1 acre in North Carolina of bell pepper. And this was from an August measurement that I took. Very important to remind you that when you measure in a field, it's a snapshot of what happened in that year, in that season, in that field, on that farm. It's not the exact same thing that's happening down the street in another farm, right? With different soil conditions, a different crew, different irrigation, you know, different market partners as well. Okay, so let's go ahead a little bit. So the total yield, or not the total yield, the marketed yield of this crop was 20,500 pounds per acre, which is pretty normal for bell pepper in North Carolina. However, that's not all that there was in the field, right? Go forward a little. There were also 5,300 some pounds of beautiful, marketable quality bell peppers that were not captured because the harvest was ended, but for some reason, right? And go forward a little. Yeah, this is good. So then there were an additional 5,300 pounds of perfectly edible, fresh, healthy bell pepper that were also not captured because the harvest was stopped. And then there were, of course, a quantity of inedible peppers in the field. So this is kind of at a micro level of what's happening in one field, one sort of data point, if you will, on one farm in one day. And there were a little over 3,000 pounds of inedible quality. So this would be over mature, damaged, diseased, rotten. So does everybody understand that this is what happens? Okay. And so the total yield of this acre was over 34,000 pounds, but this isn't the number that's captured. What growers are reporting is the marketed yield, what they collected, what they put in boxes in the cooler on the truck. So there's a lot more out there that is not typically being harvested. Go ahead. So I like to use this term, which is really nerdy. There's a post-harvest yield potential in this field of over 10,000 pounds. So that would be, for example, what y'all are able to glean, or if someone else is coming in to glean. So that's in 1 acre of bell pepper on a commercial farm in North Carolina. Go ahead, please. Oh, yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
ask how that data was collected? Like, just because the scale of that, that's like a third of our
Maybe go back.
harvest for a year, so that would come like a farm. Yeah.
Yes, this data was
Like-
personally collected by me.
Oh,
And I'm gonna get into how in just a minute.
okay.
Okay, so go ahead.
Lisa, I don't know if you're gonna show this, but I didn't Google how many acres of bell peppers there are in North Carolina.
Yeah,
There's 73,000 acres of bell peppers. which-
right. So just for our folks on Zoom, 73,000 acres of bell pepper in North Carolina. where I
Which
live.
makes that edible yield 78 million pounds.
Right.
Harvested.
78 million pounds of bell pepper potentially available in one state in 1 year in commercial wholesale production. So, you know, I mean, I've always worked with commercial farms, and I appreciate every single farm we have in the US, small, large, any kind of growing practice. We need all of them. That's my firm and strong opinion. However, if you're trying to tackle food loss on farms at scale, a nudge, a small change in behavior or a change in market conditions for growers can mean a huge, massive amount of food. So I like to work at the commercial level, because I think that it's approaching the scale that we need. So here's another project we did in Tennessee, with Society of St. Andrew, and I don't see Lynette right now, but she's amazing. Her gleaners captured data in Tennessee on these different crops and found that, for example, per acre, cucumbers averaged about 15,000 pounds per acre that were both marketable and edible, so all gleanable, so to speak, right? What do you think about that? Is that amazing? What it takes to make this happen is a handful of gleaners that understand how to measure, and you can get these kinds of numbers. Go a little forward, please. In South Carolina, we did measurement again with Society of St. Andrew, leveraging gleaners who were in the field. And we found that out of what's left in the field, on average, after the harvest, 85% of that is good to eat, fresh, healthy, safe, at the right maturity, right? Untouched, unaltered, ready to distribute, if you will. It just needs to be harvested. And they tripled the number of farms that were participating in gleaning, by taking this approach. Go forward. In North Carolina, this was based on data that I collected over these 8 different crops. You can see, go forward a little bit, a little more, a little more. Yeah, this, oops, that's good. So on a global level, this 10% is what's estimated to be left in the field. When you do replicating in-depth research on this topic, what we found is that 42% of the marketed yield was left in the field. So this means if we harvested and marketed 100 boxes of cucumbers, there would still be 42 boxes of cucumbers left in that 1 acre. Now, a lot of those are just of edible quality, not marketable quality, but there's a lot of cucumbers. Well, that's the average. Actually, in cucumber, it was more like 70%. So there would be 70 boxes of cucumber. So hopefully this makes sense. The continent level estimates were done in 2011, I think, by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Go ahead. So there's some country level estimates now floating around, one being from ReFed, and this is what they show on their website. 17.6 million surplus food tons. This was in 2023, and it's just talking about fresh produce. You can't see the food types there, but it's just talking about fresh produce. The primary amount here is not harvested. There's an amount that's donated of a little less than 2%. The rest of it is just not harvested. Some of it's used for animal feed. Go forward just a little. This is equivalent to 35.2 billion pounds, which, you know, we know it's hard to wrap our head around pounds, but if you're concerned about food insecurity, this is about 800 pounds per food insecure person in the US of fresh produce, healthy, fresh, produce of a wide variety, right? Berries, cabbage, melons, peppers, everything. Go forward a little, please. So here's a picture of me harvesting in the field. What I want to share with you today is that measurement in the field, can feel like, oh, it's so difficult, but it's really not. I designed and worked through a protocol back in 2015 that makes it really, really easy to collect data on any type of fresh produce on farms. Now, I made it up to work on vegetables, but there are ways to approach this to work with fruit trees as well. But typically speaking, this is all you need to do. You note some information from the grower or even yourself in the field and mark some rows at random. You harvest those rows and then sort that produce into 3 categories. In every field, there's going to be marketable, edible, and inedible produce, whether it's sweet corn or, zucchini. There's always these 3 categories. And then you just weigh and record that and calculate that up to the pounds per acre, and you have a comparable unit that you can share across the state. So Sean and Kathy are going to get more into the how of measurement for their project. But I want to stress to you, if I can do it, you can do it, okay? It's very straightforward. And this method is adaptable to any crop you're working with. It's adaptable if you're working on a 1-acre farm that's diverse, or a 5,000-acre farm that's 1 crop, okay? Let's go to the next slide. Here are my beautiful bell peppers, and these are the 3 categories that I was telling you about. So there's always these 3 categories. The one meets buyer specifications. It's large, beautiful, shiny. In the case of bell peppers, I think it has to be over 2.5 inches in width and height, and have a certain number of lobes in order to stand up on the pan when you're making stuffed pepper, right? They have to be really nice. And then the edible ones can be off size or color, but still solid, what's the term? Not sure. Sound, sound, undamaged, undiseased, not diseased, and at the right maturity. And then there's these unfit, which would be something that we wouldn't eat culturally on average in the US, right? So we've kind of gotten away from that period of time where we just cut that part out. So if it's damaged or not, we would consider that unfit. You can go forward. So when we understand measurement and we have numbers, suddenly we get a bigger picture, right? Here's bell peppers. In this 15-acre field, there were about 2 semi-truckloads of bell pepper, 69,986 pounds on, in an estimate, were left behind. Why? Because the price dropped. So now we have a number, and now we have why. So what does that mean? We can take action on both, right? We can take action on how many pounds are left, and we can take action on why, if we so choose, to advocate for policy or make changes at an industry-wide level. Go forward. So here's lettuce, 23,000 pounds because of small size and labor priority. So these beautiful lettuces were not 9 inches tall on the day of harvest. And so what does that mean? They were left behind because the labor needed to be somewhere else the next couple of days, right? So this tells us, yeah, we could put gleaners in there. And, greens are one of those things that everybody, is in demand for everyone, people want. And here it is fresh on the farm, right? Just needs collection and distribution. Go ahead, please. Here in this same picture we saw earlier, when we understand that 30% of the crop was lost because of that rain, wow, we can ask for some support on that. Growers can ask for some support when that happens. But you have to have that number to go along with the why. Go ahead, please. Okay, kale, everybody's favorite. In this 15-acre field, over 166,000 pounds of kale was still in, right? Because the market fluctuated, which happens every single day. Every day, sometimes more than once a day. Here you can see the area that I sampled in this picture. There were 3 areas like this, but this is one of them. Okay, you can go ahead. So this is what we want to avoid, right? Is that healthy, fresh produce getting dumped on the farm, which happens, or getting tilled in, which happens every day around the country, all the time. Growers need to plant their next crop, so it's important to understand things from their perspective. I think that's about it. Maybe there's one more. Yes, if you want to get into the weeds on this, it's my favorite subject, and so here's my email address. I'm always available. It's a joy to hear from all of the gleaners anytime, and I've worked with many of y'all and want to continue. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for taking time and for all your support in this project. Kathy's gonna get into in just a second some mechanics, and then I'm gonna talk about mechanics. But I just wanted to pause for a minute after listening to Lisa and just talk a little bit about why we felt like this was an important project for Ago to undertake. It's a very ambitious project. We're trying to gather 3,000 data points from around the country to supplement this data that so many great organizations have done. We're going to talk about how we're using much of the same methodology so that we can continue to build on this narrative and really begin to really understand this problem. Gleaners are never going to glean all the produce in fields. We're never even going to come close. I think Lynette, I overheard her saying earlier today that if we could get to just 7%, we could meet the caloric need of all the food insecure folks in the US. Right now, we're gleaning wise well below 1%. I know, Lisa shared this document here, but that takes into account all the on-farm donations and post-harvest donations and stuff like that. That just doesn't happen in the fields. Yeah, I was really struck. I'm always struck by the amount of produce, and I think those of us who are out in the fields probably also are. I also have a really hard time comprehending it. I shared that little quick math I did over there at the table, but 78 million pounds is more than when we did the 2020 gleaning census. That's more than all of us harvested that year. All gleaning organizations. So, once we can begin to really tell this story, we can really help shape the future of how we reduce food loss on farms, how farmers, have better markets for their produce, and how we do, better recover that produce for those in need. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy. Kathy Sharp is the programming coordinator for Ago. Kathy is an experienced program manager, working for over 20 years managing projects for Fortune 500 tech companies. She has an MA in education from Stanford University. Kathy transitioned her skills and experience to work in her areas of passion and gleaning in 2020. Kathy gleans from the Portland Fruit Tree Project and delivers gleaned produce to the Bellingham House of Bread. Kathy's the author of Aging into Poverty, a looming crisis for American women. Kathy lives outside of Portland, Oregon. She's going to walk through some of the logistics of how to participate in the program, and then I'm going to walk us through how to do some measurement and all of that kind of fun stuff.
Okay, good morning, and we're going to take a break in 10 minutes, so that's an important data point as well. Okay, so Sean has talked a little bit about what our objectives are for this project, and all of you we want you to participate. We want your organizations to participate. And I'm gonna walk a little bit through the mechanics of that. But taking a step back is to what are our objectives for this project? So providing more accurate estimates of on-farm food loss, helping your organizations adapt and identify best practices. And the way we're gonna be doing that is through our gleaning census. Gathering urban fruit tree food waste, that hasn't been done. So there's been a lot of measurement about on-farm food loss, but we're extending this methodology for those of you who glean predominantly in community gardens and backyards to participate. And those who were working in our pilot project were able to start giving us that data. So we thank you for that. This is also a support for farmers. So this information isn't just helpful for policymakers or gleaning organizations. We're gonna feed the information back to farmers to help them identify how to minimize their on-farm food loss, and to gleaners in urban areas, how to maximize their efficiency in backyard gleaning. And lastly, support for food pantries. So this information is going to be shared with our pantry partners. What important information to include in their grants about the source of their produce, how gleaners have become more efficient. So these are some of our objectives for this project. And I want to point out that we are funded and through SARE, which is part of the USDA grant. So in order to participate in the AGO project, there are 5 steps. So step 1, make sure that your AGO membership is up to date. So this morning, those of you who are members are participated in our membership meeting. And part of being able to elect board members and part of your responsibility is to pay our annual membership dues. So if you have any questions about the status of your organization's membership, or if you don't know who your member designated voter is, please come see me during lunch. So dues are annual and they're quite modest. It's $25 a year if your organization does not have paid staff, and $50 a year if your organization does have paid staff. And you can affect your dues payment quickly and securely online. Those of you who are on my mailing list probably get updates about this. Oops, time to pay your membership dues. So that is step 1 to participate. We want you all to be members in order to be part of this SARE project.
We also offer scholarships if memberships are prohibited for you or your organization. Just reach out to Kathy or myself.
Thank you, Sean. So if you didn't catch that on the Zoom, we offer scholarships if even the $25 is prohibited. Step 2 is to complete the online gleaning questionnaire, the census questionnaire. And so in order to do that efficiently, you need to gather budget data about your organization in advance. And so we're going to go back to the 2022 budget, 2023 budget, and 2024 budget. So you'll need to have that at the ready before you start. And we just need bottom line budget for your gleaning program, not the entire organization, because some of you are one program within a bigger hub organization. The next step is to complete the census interview. So this is about a 45-minute interview, which you will have with either Sean or myself, and you'll be scheduling that online. And then you can start the in-the-field measurement. And the last step is to submit your invoice for payment. And I'm keeping an eye on the time here because I want to make sure that we take our break at the same time as the other group. Next, and I'm going to go into each of these steps in a little more detail. Okay, so we talked about making sure that your membership is up to date. And if you haven't joined AGO, what a great time to join, because this is a benefit extended to you. So once again, membership $25 for organizations without paid staff, $50 for organizations with paid staff, scholarships available. So the next step is to complete the census questionnaire. And it's designed to be answered by your gleaning program manager or a knowledgeable volunteer. It takes about 30 minutes to complete. So review the questions beforehand, and all of these have links to where you're supposed to go, and I can send this out after this presentation. So you need to gather your budget data, and then I don't know if we can link to it now. You want to try to link to it? We'll see how this goes. Try this one. Continue. So this is giving you a little bit of an idea about what you're going to encounter. So how many volunteers in your gleaning program each year? How do you count the number above? Do you work with any of the following service organizations? How many paid staff members are part-time? How many seasonal? So you can see all the questions ahead of time, and this is a simple form fill out. Like I said, it has to be someone who has knowledge of your overall organization, or you have to know who to go to in order to answer those questions. It's all available online, and answer as much as you can.
Don't worry, we'll get there. There you go.
Thank you. So are there any questions about these first two steps? Ensuring that your membership is up to date, you can ask me if you don't know, and then completing the online questionnaire. Anybody in the room has already done the first two steps, completed the questionnaire? Oh, good, good. Is there any feedback that you'd like to give the others? Was it hard to do it?
It wasn't hard, I felt like it was really accessible.
Hard, not hard, really accessible. Rita?
Marina did the questionnaire for
Okay,
I concur.
you were third. Okay, great. So you heard it from someone who already did it. Wasn't hard, it was accessible. That's fantastic. So the next step. We'll go to the next step here. So completing the interview. So the census interview is a conversation, and you're gonna have that conversation with myself or Sean. You schedule this online, so at a time that meets your schedule. We've got schedules available for the Pacific time zone, which I'm in, and then Sean, you're in Central Time? Mountain Time. But we've got a range of appointments all the way from morning through early afternoon. It'll take about 45 minutes, but we're here to listen to you. If it goes a little longer, that's fine with us. And you can complete your schedule using the calendaring tool online. Next slide. And so the last one is really important, billing and feedback. So we offer a stipend for participation in this membership project. Stipends are $100 for data collected on urban fruit tree gleans and $200 for data collected on one crop on a farm, $250 for 2 crops. Your organization can collect a maximum of 2 samples at an individual glean, a maximum of 2 gleans per week. You're to submit your request for your stipend by the 5th of the month following the month in which you measured. And you complete an online invoice form and send that to Sean. And we also welcome your feedback about the process That's important to us as we're just starting out. We did complete a successful pilot, but we're getting into peak gleaning season. So if you have a problem with any of the tech, because you're going to be filling out this form online as you're measuring, please get in touch with us, or please provide any other feedback. Any questions before we go for break? And then Sean's going to get into the details of how you're measuring. Okay, break time. Oh, question.
Criteria for the size of the farm that the measurements are made.
So when you hear Sean talk about the sample, I think that's going to answer your question. We do have two separate forms, one for traditional farms that market their produce to the public, and one for a community garden. So if you think that your farm is, and Sean will go into the distinction of which form you're to use, but we've already thought about including community gardens in this study. Yes, I see that. Okay, it's break time.
All right, you have like 10 more seconds, 20 more seconds to find your seats, and then I'm gonna get started. Sarah, you can go ahead and take me to the next slide if you want. So, Kelly talked about the census. I'm going to talk about how to participate in measurement. Lisa talked about the need for measurement. One of the things that we were really excited about this SARE grant when Lisa shared about it last year at the symposium was this idea to be able to tell a much more complex story about being. And obviously many of you were excited when we said, hey, should we go after this grant? I think 20 or 30 of you wrote letters of support that said, yes, we really want to be able to gather this data. We really want to participate in this program. And you might say to yourself, why does Sean want all this census data as well? Because we don't just want to tell a story about the problem or the number of the problem. We want to tell a much more complex story. So that's why we really want you to participate in the census as well. So we can talk about what you're doing, what your needs are, how do we address this issue. We believe at the end of this 3-year project, we're going to be able to tell a really, really compelling story about food loss on farms, food waste in backyards, and the gleaning effort to recover it, and help really be part of the narrative of where this goes next. All right, so take me to the next slide there. All right, so when we entered this project, we knew we wanted to capture a pretty complex data set. And it became a little tricky how to do that. And what we realized is we needed to divide into 2 categories and then divide again into 2 categories. So there is actually 4 individual forms that you could be filling out here. So the first question you're going to ask yourself is this a commercial farm or not? You might say that's a super straightforward question in the field. It's not quite as straightforward as you think it is. How we've decided to make this division is, was that field or tree previously harvested for sale? Did they harvest something to sell out of that field? So if I go out to Lisa's example of this kale field, the buyer decided not to buy that field, and I'm doing my measurement in that field, where am I going to put that? Commercial or non-commercial?
Commercial.
No. Non-commercial, because it was not harvested for sale. That is probably a commercial farm, but if it wasn't harvested for sale, you're going to put it in the non-commercial category. That is because in the commercial category, the thing we're trying to understand is how much produce is left after a harvest. So if I do my kale harvest in a field that's been harvested for a CSA for a dozen weeks, and they're like, okay, we can't give our CSA customers kale anymore. They're all going to revolt. We got to tear out that kale, come glean it. And I find that there was, 1,000 pounds in an acre in that kale field. If I compare that to the data of a field that's never been harvested, it's really going to give us weird numbers. So what we're trying to understand is, after kale farmers have harvested their field, how much and what quality of that is left. So. Tom, go ahead.
Farms that sold for profit. I hate to be picky, but that's not the whole.
Yeah, okay, well, Excel sold for profit, but it was sold for money, some sort of financial transaction happened, could have been sold at a loss, could have been sold however they want to sell it, but if there was a harvest for sale that happened, it goes in commercial. If I run a 5-tree backyard apple orchard that I sell from a farm stand in front of my driveway, those apple trees are going in the commercial category. If I have 5 apple trees in my backyard that just fall on the ground, or I just harvest to make some cider or applesauce with, and I give the rest to you, that goes in the non-commercial. I'm sure I'll get questions about this later, but do you guys feel like you maybe understand it? Okay, let's move on. Okay, so we're gonna go first through non-commercial because it's a little bit simpler. And then we'll go to commercial farms in a moment. So if you've decided you're doing a non-commercial farm, because whatever it is you're harvesting was not going to sale, you're then gonna ask yourself 2 questions. Is this a tree fruit? Or is this a row crop fruit? And I know there's some others that fit into there. We're not gonna get that specific, but if it grows on a tree, it goes in the tree fruit category. If it doesn't grow on a tree, it goes in the row crop category. Make sense? Okay, next. All right, so row crop, probably the hardest crop to measure, because it requires us to do a bit of measurement in the field. So if I imagine that these tables here are my rows, and if I go out and I just measure from row edge to row edge, that is going to give me bad data, because I'm not going to understand how wide the walkways were, and I'm going to assume that it was planted, row to row of crops when I decide how many acres. And one of the things we're going to do with this data is take the area you harvested and use some math to figure out what that waste would have been if you had sampled a full acre. So what's really important in the row crop is that I measure the row as well. So I can do this in a couple ways. I could start at the edge of this walkway and measure all the way to the edge of this walkway. I can start in the middle of the walkway and measure to the middle of the walkway. What's important is that with my row, I calculate the area of the walkway as well. So I'm going to take my tape measure, I'm going to measure that off, I'm going to write down the width, and then I'm going to measure the length of the row as well. Does that make sense to everyone? Awesome. Take me to the next slide here. All right, if I'm just doing trees, this is much easier. With backyard fruit trees, we do want to understand one other data point, because I'm sure you guys have all seen the variety of sizes of backyard fruit trees. From, each tree that's about this tall to an apple tree that we can fit in this building. And so how we're measuring that is we're using a standard measurement tool, which is to measure the circumference of a tree. I think we can go one slide, sorry. I might go back to the slide in a second, Sarah, but I want to do this right quick. So at your chest height, you're going to measure the circumference of the tree. Who does that here for tree harvesting here? How many of you often harvest the whole tree? Half the time, yeah, sometimes, but we don't, maybe the tree's 35 feet tall. So we're okay with you not harvesting the whole tree. We wanna know two things, we need two things to happen though for this data to work. Is we need to know the percentage of that tree roughly you harvested, did I do? I don't need to know 47%, I need to know half or a third or, 90%, something like that. And then the other piece that's really important is you can't just walk around the tree and pick the best apples and throw them into my sample. This is no cherry picking, to use that term here. We need you to harvest, if you're gonna harvest everything you can reach, we need you to harvest everything you can reach. If you're gonna harvest everything you can reach with a ladder, harvest everything you can reach that way, but make sure that you're harvesting full areas of a tree. If the tree's so big, you're just not gonna get to it with your volunteer groups. Concentrate them on one side of the tree at least for me here. Try to get the whole areas clean so we're getting good data. Does that make sense? Okay, go ahead. All right, so the last distinguisher, and Lisa did a great job sharing this with her slides earlier, is I want to know the quality of the produce. So we're dividing it into marketable produce. So the best way to think about this, because many of you are not going to know the buyer standards, right? Like Lisa talked about the number of size of peppers or anything else like that. We're just asking you, when you're in the field, to say, is this something I would see at the grocery store? And if it's something you would see at the grocery store, then we're going to put it in the marketable produce category. The second category is this B grade or edible by humans but not marketable. So this category is for stuff that doesn't have blight or damage or cuts in it, anything like that, but you're like, yeah, that's totally fine, it just looks weird. Maybe it's a little small or a little big or a little bit the wrong color, that's okay. The last category is produce not fit for human consumption. Again, you might pick up these words here. Not gonna let Tom raise his hand back there and pick on me. Cause you might eat it, I might cut off the cut in the potato, or I might, cut the stud skull and spot off of a bell pepper. But for this survey, they are going in C grade produce. The stuff that isn't fit for human consumption. If you have to cut a piece off to eat it, goes in here. If you can eat the whole thing, awesome, you can put it in the edible but not marketable. Okay, these are, when we piloted this, these are the areas that we had the most confusion in. How are you guys feeling about this? Good. Question. All right, awesome.
Oh, we have a question.
Go ahead.
Like, examples of different crops, like pictures of what to talk about, or mostly A, B grade, I feel like it's pretty clear what C grade is, but I'm thinking about some crops, it's a little.
Yeah, we don't have, but I think that's something we can probably work on and put together again. These are gonna be a bit subjective. Some people may put something in A and B. That's okay. What we're hoping for is to get the general right categories here. But we can put together some pictures for y'all. Kathy's gonna have to remember that, but.
So, right down.
All right, go ahead. All right, so I've gone out to this field of kale that's never been harvested before. I get out there, I've got my form ready, I go out, the first thing I do is I'm gonna measure the row. Now, how big of a sample size do I need? Ideally, what we're looking for is 3 random rows that are 25 feet long. But you may say, well, my community garden does not have 3 25-foot long rows of kale. In that case, we ask that you just sample the whole area available to glean. You just sample that whole area available to glean to you. And that will count as the crop. Let's say you show up and you're like, oh, wow, this guy's got kale and radishes and blueberries and bananas. I'm gonna harvest all of this. You can do that. That's great. I'm really excited for your glean. What I don't want is data on 6 crops. So we are limiting your data to 2 crops, sharing. So that means I say to myself, what are the largest crops I'm gleaning here today? And those are the ones I sample for this survey. Please glean the rest. We're not limiting what you can glean. We don't want to get 10 pounds, 10 pounds, 10 pounds. We want to get the larger sample areas if we can. Sarah, will you click on this later? Oops. All right, so these are the type of questions. We have a printable form of this that you can take in the field. It's going to go out to you if you don't have Wi-Fi access in your field, so you don't have a phone access, or you don't want to do it on your phone. You just want to write it down and come back to the computer and put it in. It's a really simple form. You know, we're going to gather some information about who's conducting this. You'll notice we're only gathering zip codes. We don't want to know farm name. We don't want to track that back to an individual area. We do want to know zip codes so we can understand the region of the country that this is coming from. Scroll down a little bit. I can go next. Oh, and then I'm gonna, here I'm gonna ask type of site. So this is a private residence or any other community space. We'll go in community garden. So if this is a farm, you can put it in private residence. But if it's a community space, put it in community gardens. We're looking for acre size. This is just to help us understand, is there differences in loss depending on farm size? We're going to gather that both on the community garden space and in the commercial farm space. We're not going to gather it in the backyard fruit tree space. And then there's some questions on primary market for the crop. Many times in this space, it's going to be non-applicable. That's okay. But if this was like, hey, I'm gathering excess after the community garden members have gone through, we want to know that. Or if this was a farm that was planted just for gleaning or a food pantry, we want to know that as well. And if there's secondary markets, you can add that. Sorry, take me to the next one. I just clicked next right there. Okay. Here's a quick video that Lisa did that you can watch if you want to understand how to do the row size. Here's that information again about the rows. We're looking for 3 rows. Ideally 20 feet long, but if it's a full crop, that's okay as well. And then you're going to put in the weight of the marketable produce. Go ahead and go down. Next one. And then we're going to ask some questions about how you distributed that produce. This is for our telling the whole story experience here. So where did that produce go? And when we're talking about this question, you'll see it's written up there at the top. This is all the produce you gleaned that day. This is not your sample. Just where did it go? And it helps us start to paint a better picture. Hold on a second. About how produce is gleaned. And then lastly, we're going to ask some questions about the staff time that you spent in this glean. Again, as part of our larger picture understanding, what kind of resources and volunteers are going into gleaning this? Sarah, you can exit this and go back. Go way over there, yeah. Sorry, this is hard to do, I know.
I can't see it. Yeah. This thing? Okay.
Let me see if I can see it. If I can see from here. See. All right. I think. I'm gonna see if you can go to the next slide, see if that works. All right, so back one, if you will. Very similar form with non-commercial fruit tree waste. So if I want to measure non-commercial fruit tree waste, I'm gonna go out to the backyard of the folks who are donating the peaches to me. I'm gonna measure the circumference of that tree at about chest height. I'm gonna gather that I can't say that word now, circumference gag data and enter it in. And I don't care about the yard size or any of that other stuff in this data point. I am gonna ask some similar questions to the other form. You know, if there was an intended beneficiary of this, was it just being grown to eat at home? Was it part of the community garden? Those kind of questions will be asked. We're gonna ask a few questions about, you know, where all that green produce went. And then remember, no cherry picking, pick all the fruit that you can get from the portion of the tree that you're measuring, and we're gonna ask what percentage of that tree did you harvest? Go ahead.
Quick question, is there any consideration for like, for a lot of the trees that are backyards in Spokane, people don't spray
Yep,
moss,
yep,
so we're still counting that as inedible produce, correct?
yep,
Right.
exactly, yep. Moth damage, calling moth damaged apples, while usable for lots of things, are going in the inedible.
Right.
Okay, let's pause here. These are our non-commercial space. What questions do you all have about collecting data in a non-commercial space? Go ahead, Tom.
Community garden scenario. Our community garden are small, like small lots, we've got 100 people. I don't know how to manage that. I don't have a clue how to proceed when there's, I mean, think of 100 individual farmers, some say you can't come in my little fence, and others welcome you in. A lot of the individual farmers lean themselves, throw it themselves, it's really complicated on that scale.
Yeah, you know, I haven't done your census interview, I know a bit about your guys' organization. In order for this to work, you have to be able to do this clean harvest that was talked about over here. And whether that can happen on your community garden, I don't know. I was trying to think about that a minute ago when you were asking the question, Tom, is it may not work in that space. Because we do need you to be able to get all the A, B grade, and C grade to understand this data. And if you just, you know, so in Tom's community garden, oftentimes the gardeners harvest it and they put it in this cooler. We need to think a little bit about that data and if it actually will be
Well,
usable.
with that, 'cause I can tell, we can bring those people together and say, if we're gonna be donating, do it this way.
Yeah,
Like, you're talking about like tomatoes, garden plots, we've got 100 plots. How do you relate to tomatoes to this one plot and all the other tomatoes that you can't get access to?
yeah. So what I would want to know in those tomatoes is I want to know what was the size of the area the tomatoes came out of. I don't need to know the ones you didn't get access to. This can be the same on a farm, or, you know, I got this question a lot as we did the pilot rollout in, you know, if I'm harvesting a property with 7 orange trees, what if I don't harvest all 7 trees? That's okay. I just want to know the tree you harvested for the sample and what percentage of that you harvested. And you may donate other stuff in the community garden that wasn't in the sample. So I don't need to know that either. I just want to know the area that you had access to. So if you had access to 1 row of tomatoes on the tomato farm or in some sort of community garden space, I just want to know the size of that row you had access to and what types of produce came out of that row. Got it.
On the non-commercial row crop form, on the non-commercial row crop form, the choice for where you harvested from was backyard,
space or community garden space, but what if it was at like a great big commercial farm? I mean, I feel like management practices kind of come into play with analyzing the data, so is it really the choice is community garden, even if you were at a big commercial farm and harvested that field for money?
So if we're harvesting from any private space, it goes in private residence. So a commercial farm will still go in that private residence space. You're making me think about a few things, but we'll think about them as we roll through this. I think an important piece to know is we did a pilot of this, but due to some timing issues and some weather issues, we only got pilot data back on non-commercial fruit trees. So as we roll this out, we're actually going to roll the other 3 out a little bit slower to get, and there may be a few changes that happen in that process. And I may need like a little box that says, was this a farm? And we may add a box for that. Maybe we'll add a click for farm in that space there. Because we do want to be able to pull that data somehow out, but we didn't want to corrupt the other data, so.
I guess this is just a curiosity, I think. If, say we're in a top situation where there's a community garden, you're harvesting maybe 2 plots of tomatoes, and you know there's 8 more plots of tomatoes that are like not to be used, but are not being, you can't access for any reason. Would you include all 10 of those plots like in your data, or is it just those 2 plots?
Just the plots you pick.
Because there's nothing in the data about, like, say you're on the kale farm and you're harvesting 3 rows, you're not including the rest of acreage in the data.
No, because we don't need that data. What we need to know is the sample size. We actually had some questions in about, how big was the kale field that you're harvesting, but it's actually data we realize we don't need. What we need to know is sample size. What portion of an acre was that sample size? So that we can then extrapolate that data up and say, this is what, due to our sample, our random sample, taken at 3 separate random rows, this is what we believe will be the availability on that acreage. And then we get, like I pulled that data as I was sitting here a moment ago when Lisa was sharing about sweet peppers, is like how many sweet peppers or how many acres of kale are grown in Maine? And then we can share that back with policymakers and say, look, here's the data we got from, 45 kale farms in Maine that says this is the waste. Here's how much kale's grown in your state. Here's how much excess food loss we believe was available there. All right, we have got just basically 20-ish minutes to work through commercial. So if there's no other questions, I'm gonna move. Oh, go ahead.
It seems like, just kind of understanding data, like if you can't get those 3 separate samples, it sort of seems like. If you can't get those 3 separate samples, it sort of seems like. Do you still want that data? Like if it's only 1 row, like it seems like you need those 3, an N of 3 to be significant.
It's obviously better data if we have those 3 rows, but if all the kale that's available in that farm is 1 50-foot row or 20-foot row, that's okay for this data point. Okay, Sarah, take me to the next slide. All right, commercial farm measurement. This is going to be incredibly valuable data for us, but it's a little bit trickier. I don't really have to have a conversation with the homeowner of the apple tree that I'm gathering this data. I do need to have that conversation with farmers. If I need some information from them and we want them to be okay with us sharing that data. Go ahead and take me to the next slide. So Lisa talked a bit about this in her presentation, but I just want to re-emphasize, as we're working with farmers, it's really, really important that they understand that food loss on farms is normal. that it's happening on every farm. I would be hard pressed to show me a farm that had no food loss. And this isn't coming from a place of judgment. This isn't something they've done wrong. Oftentimes when we see the most food loss, it's when the farmer has done everything right. Everything's gone really well for them. It's also really important as you're talking to farmers to let them know no specific data about their farm is going to be shared. And none of the growing practices questions we're asking come with any sort of judgment. We don't, we're not coming on this farm to tell them how to grow their produce. You may have in your own organization, some of you may have standards that we only harvest organic, we only do that. That's fine in your own organization, but I really encourage you in this conversation that it's just to better understand how growing practices might affect food loss, but no judgment to them of what is a better growing practice, kill or no kill for them. That's not the space for that here. And we think it's really important that you share this data back with them. And share it back with them in real time. When you're done with this measurement and you go to put it in, we strongly encourage you to put that in an email or a text to your farmer as well, saying, hey, this is what we learned in the field today. We thought it might be helpful to you. If you want, you can communicate some of these reasons that Lisa shared, ways in which they can use this data. We hope, you may say something along the lines, we hope, we thought this data might be useful to you. If you may want to look for other markets for the other fields that you still have left out there. Or, we found, please use this data in any way that would help your farming practices. Appreciate you letting us collect it. Here it is shared back out with you. And talk to them in advance. Don't have a farmer walk out to you with measuring tapes and buckets sorting their produce and be like, what are you doing? Have that conversation in advance. Explain that it's part of a national study, that it's going, nothing is going to be tied back to their farm, and that we know this is happening everywhere. And I love Lisa's comments of, remove the you from this. We really want to be careful farmers don't feel blame or guilty about this availability of food in their fields or loss. Okay, go ahead. We compiled a script or an email that will go out to you that will share some ways to talk to farmers about this. Please feel free to edit it and use it any way you want. But we just wanted to give you guys a starting point, how to talk in a non-judgmental way. Lisa helped us work on this. We appreciate all that effort of everyone that did it. And totally feel free to modify it in any way that works for you. Okay, go ahead, take me to the next slide. All right, so now that we've had that conversation with the farmer, they understand what we're collecting, we're gonna go out and do some collection. I think there's a couple pieces in here that got touched on a moment ago, but right now, for the first year of this pilot, we are limiting your data collection to 2 data entries per week. So that could be 1 backyard glean, and 1 on-farm glean with 1 crop, or 1 on-farm glean with 2 crops, or it could be 2 on-farm gleans with 2 crops on both of them. That's okay. This should fit seamlessly into the other work you're doing. We're not asking you, we wouldn't expect you to go out and just do measurement gleans. This should be a glean you're already doing in the field. The only difference is many of you probably don't pick everything, and we are asking you to pick everything in the sample area. If I'm picking an acre field of cucumbers, I don't need to pick everything in every row. I'm just going to instruct a small group of volunteers how to pick in that sample area and set them up. So if I were out picking cucumbers with the group, I would say, okay, guys, let me grab you 3 right here. Can you help me with this sample? And I'm gonna put a flag at one end of row one and a flag at 20 feet or 25 feet at the end of it. And I'm gonna say, in this row, please pick all of this. Throw it in this buckets and we'll sort it in a minute. Or maybe I'll have them sort as I go. Totally up to you. And then I will sort and I will weigh that and I will write that data down and I will put it in the form. Some questions we're asking about farms, this is just to help us understand general trends. So, ask the farmer or estimate yourself, what's the total acres in production? Not of that crop, but in total production. There's some agricultural practices questions. Again, I really hope that I wouldn't read this list to people. I would, get to know your farmers, and know their agricultural practices, but just say, hey, tell me a little bit about this, your growing practices, what happened in this field? And then ask them where the market was, understanding, how do they sell this produce typically? And then, asking why the surplus is to be gleaned. Maybe it's, we're done with our harvest for the year, or maybe it's, I did my first pick, and then the buyer or the price dropped before my second pick. All right, so again, for row crops, we're looking for minimal sample size of 3 rows, 25 feet, or the entire crop available for you to harvest. With commercial orchards, we're looking for a sample size of 3 trees. And the other question we're gonna ask in commercial is, what is the planting density, or how many trees are in that acre? Or if it's a half acre, how many trees are in there? And most farmers will know this planting density for you, and you're just gonna ask them, what's the density of trees here? Okay, so then you gather your supplies, you're gonna need a measuring tape, you're gonna need a scale. You either have access to the tool or print it out ahead of time so you can enter it when you get back to the office. Go ahead, Sarah. So you can watch the training video, make sure you're measuring correctly. Again, we're measuring walkways plus rows. Somehow, like I explained earlier, where we get the whole walkway width. This can be from middle of walkway to middle of walkway, or edge of walkway to edge of walkway. You can pick that. Just make sure I'm getting the whole thing. Yeah, you're gonna enter that data into the tool. You don't have to calculate square footage. All you have to do is put length and width and number of rows. We're gonna calculate all the rest of it for you. Go ahead, Sarah. Yeah, let's go to this board.
Don, you've got 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know. First, yes. Sorry. And then, yes. So as you can see here, if this is not a commercial farm, I'm not gonna be able to go on. If it hasn't been previously harvested, I'm not gonna be able to go on. I'm gonna go to the other form. Okay, push next. I go next. So similar information gathered here. No, darn it.
Just make some.
What I wanted to show you is we are asking some general questions about growing practices. These are organic, non-organic, certified organic, non-certified organic, no-till, those kind of things. You can go ahead and X it out. You guys can see those. We can talk more about them in questions if you want. Go ahead, take your next slide. As I mentioned, we're not measuring circumference of the tree and soil that's in here. We don't need that in commercial. We just need to know planting density. That's gonna tell us the size of the trees, really. And how many trees you're planting here. So, again, in commercial, if you can't get the whole tree, that's okay. Sometimes you just, the farmer may not even want you on ladders. They may say, come through and pick what you can get from the ground. Fine with that, let's just estimate the percentage of the tree. Go ahead, one more slide, one more. All right, I made it all the way through. Tons of information. what questions do we have, and can we pass the mic for those questions so that we get them to the Zoom folks? Maybe Kathy, will you pass the mic for me?
So, I don't know how I was involved, but I was somebody as an EPA fellow in May, asked you to lead one of these harvests last summer. I don't know if the data got input or not, but it was strawberries, and I think the one thing I would need like advice on or to be like swayed on is we spent a lot of time harvesting strawberries that were in the C category. And just like thinking about the mission of what I'm trying to do, of really just connecting food with people, that was my one qualm essentially, was that most of what we harvested didn't feed anybody, and projecting that out over 2 times a week or something, it gets the limited resources and people that I have, albeit it gets me a little bit further away from what I'm trying to do. So I don't know if you have advice for that kind of qualm, and then maybe because I just missed the beginning, or what are succinctly, what are the, if we want to get like involved, like what are the could you repeat just like quickly what the steps are, the next step?
Yeah, so if you want to get involved, we ask that you become a NAGO member. We ask that you participate in our gleaning census, so we can get a wider picture of what's going on here. And then you attend this training, and you'll get a sign up from Kathy to participate. And then you can be involved after that. We ask a couple other things throughout the year. We're going to have a follow-up call about mid-season. We ask you to participate in that and, share what's working, what's not working. Obviously, we ask you to share feedback as you go through the process. But that's basically it. So if you've done the census and you've done this training, you're basically ready to go. We're going to roll this out a little bit slow in these other 3 categories over the next couple weeks. We'll send out an email to all of you that says, to everyone who's in AGO that says, hey, you participated in the training. Please let Kathy know that you want to participate in this measurement. And we'll get you started, and it will send you an email link that has all these links, all the resources will be shared with you, and you'll go out and collect. And we know that this is additional work. We know that typically you're not picking C grade stuff. You're usually leaving it in the field. And what we would ask is that you, at least a few harvests, you do pick that so that we can get this data. This isn't something we would ask you to do long-term or all the time. Because we realize it doesn't fit the mission. And actually, if we're talking about resources and everything else, leaving those C grade strawberries right in the field is probably the best choice. But if we don't gather them, we won't have the data that we need. And so that's why we ask for this portion we do. And that's why we're stipending people and trying to help support that piece. Because we know it's extra. We know it's and we hope the stipend covers the extra work plus helps support your organization. That was the design of it. We know they're not large stipends. It's a good start to get some additional resources in your organizations. I would have loved them to be larger, but we're also, a significant amount of money is going to this grant. We have $500,000 that's going out with stipends to you all over the next 2 years. So it definitely will add up. Go ahead, Lisa.
I just wanted to speak to both of those questions real quick. The reason behind sampling what's inedible is it gives you a picture of, you have all of that data together, you can see how much of what was left behind was actually edible, cleanable product. So I don't know if you remember the slide that I showed that in South Carolina, we found that 85% of what was left in the field was edible, good and fresh and healthy and could be distributed. So when we don't harvest the inedible portion, we really don't know. how that shakes out. Also, I wanna say that, you know, just like in gleaning, in data collection, if the produce is large, like a cabbage, you'll probably get your measurement done in like 20 minutes. If it's small, like strawberries or green beans or blueberries, it's gonna take a long time. So, you know, to do that sorting and the harvesting and everything. So keep that in mind. It's much easier to, take data on something like cucumber or pepper or watermelon than something really small.
Other questions?
Will you be sharing this data when you finish?
We will. So we will, if you're participating in the study, you're gonna have access to this data in real time. So if you wanna look through and see it, during that process, and then we are going to compile reports on this data and share it out in hopefully a really visual and compelling way. And that's available to all of us, to use any way we want. You're obviously welcome to use the raw data at any time. If you want, you know, some summaries during the process and you're not participating, reach out. We're more than happy to share the data, as many ways as possible. We hope to see this data combined with other studies that have been done, by so many, you know, we weren't, this, main project wasn't us. And so I would love to see data from that project too. And we think, you know, if we can get enough, there's a lot of small pieces of data out there. People have done little studies here and there, and some of them aren't that little. But we would really love to see all of this compiled to tell a really compelling story, and a really complete picture about what's happening. Go ahead, Tom.
Real quick, I can answer, maybe Lisa does probably, question from the farmer, he said, is this the government?
Yeah, I think you can truthfully say, like, look, this is a USDA funded study, but it's being done by our organization that we're a member of. You know, this, and it's going back shared with them, and I think letting the farmers know, like, this data should be available to those farmers in real time as well, so that it can be helpful to them. You know, this isn't going into some USDA database, but it's not to say USDA won't use the data. I myself would be really happy if they use the data, and if the government used the data to shape policies. But we're not the government, we are funded by government though, but that's where it's at.
I'll just shout it first. Can the stipend go to farms if, like, say I talk to a farmer, they're really interested and they would be willing to use their labor for this? And like, because obviously we have good access to gleaning, but their access is ultimate, and if they're really interested in it and they can do this seamlessly, like, is there any way that that could actually go to farms, or can it only go to gleaning organizations?
We would give it to you, you could do whatever you want. If you're like, look, the best way for us to participate is I've got 3 farmers who are gonna collect this data, and I'm just gonna pass the money straight to them, great, I am stoked on that. But I'm not gonna send checks to like 500 farmers. I wanna limit my check writing burden to sending it to you and letting you guys do that. You know, some of you say, you know what, look, we really wanna compensate the farmers half this, we wanna give it all to them. That's great. I you know, I love ways to get more funds into farms as well. But that's not specifically who we're gonna make the payment to, but once it's made to you, do as you please.
Is my understanding, like, it's not required that you use 2 a week, because that's the most you can do.
We're limiting it to that. It's not required. You can do 2 studies, the whole thing, 1 study, the whole thing. You can try it once and say, this really sucks, I'm not gonna do it again. I'm totally okay with any of that. You know, or you can just have a few big gleans you do every year and you wanna share those. Any way you wanna participate, and we may in the second year restrict it more, we may open it up. One of the things is we don't know what the demand is. The other thing we're not saying is only measure these crops. Once we have the first year of data, we may come back and say, you know what, guys, I don't need any more data on cabbage. I have, you know, 700 data points on cabbage. food waste, so you can do whatever you want, so what I'm saying is, second year of this may look different in the number of participation or crop participation than this first year, but this first year, we're just limiting that to frankly make sure everyone gets a chance to participate and we get diverse data.
I have a question from the chat. Sorry, go ahead.
Are we the only collectors, like, this is literally there, so the only?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's other projects like this going on and some other, I don't know if anyone else is doing on-farm loss collection, Lisa, I don't.
I think the project in Minnesota, maybe, and, maybe Concord Jungle.
Yeah, I think Concrete Jungle's doing a bit of data, but yeah, as far as the funding that Agro received, we're only asking you as our leading organizations to collect that data.
So comment in the chat, it doesn't sound like this will include seconds from pack houses. About 50% of our organization's cleaning is seconds, and sometimes this needs sorting. I'm guessing it would be hard to find that marketable portion, the farmer would have to be more involved.
Yeah, we are not measuring post-harvest rescue. So that also includes not just seconds from pack houses, but if your farmer, when you're on their farm, gives you 12 crates of tomatoes that they already harvested, that data doesn't go in here either. That's really valuable data. There's a ton of things we could be measuring. And hopefully someone else will measure post-harvest rescue in another day. But that's not what we're measuring here. We're measuring pre-harvest food loss and waste. Or post-harvest, I guess, unharvested. However you want to think about that, that is not post-harvest rescue. Any other questions? I know we're over time, but I want to make sure I get your questions. All right, thank you so much. Please watch this recording. Keep your eyes peeled for information about participating. This is good. We're going live with this in just a couple weeks here, as soon as we get back in the office. So we're excited. Thank you guys all for your willingness to help with this.